Hey everybody, Ray here. A friend of mine is an artist, a pretty darn good artist, I think. This is one of her paintings here. She was the one who taught me how to make these floating frames. The thing I like about these floating frames is that when I look at art, I want to see the art. The frame should do nothing more than enhance that art. It shouldn't detract. So I don't like big, heavy frames. I really like these floating frames that just really kind of put a band around that art, but let you see the art for what it is. If anything, the color of the band, the color of the floating frame should enhance the color that is in the painting here. She has brought me another painting and she wants me to make a floating frame for it. So I'm going to do that. If that's of interest to you, stick around and I'll show you how to do it. And don't forget, if you like this video, hit that like button and subscribe. The boards you need to make these frames is pretty straightforward. This is simply a 1x2 pine board. This is a more finished grade of pine board, but when you think about it, it sits back behind the picture. So if you can find this in a common quality of board, it'll be less expensive. It doesn't show anyway. I just couldn't find one that wasn't warped, so I wound up using this finished board. For the sides of the frame, you can go one of two ways. This is simply a piece of lattice. It's 1/4 inch by 1 3/8 inches wide. The way that works is that you would just glue that to fit against your backboard that way. Another way to go is a trim. Now this trim, I don't remember what it's called, but it looks like lattice, but it's not. It's more of a trim board. It's more of a finished quality. It has rounded edges. This is 3/8 of an inch by 1 5/8 inch. I typically use this all the time. So you would glue that to the side of your backer board here, and then your painting will fit down in there like that. So that's how it works with those couple of components that you need to make this frame. Pretty simple. Now at this point, what you want to think about is, what is the color of your frame going to be? A lot of times, what people will do is to make this back here black, and then they'll stain this sideboard. If you're going to do that, my recommendation would be to paint this black first, stain this first, and then glue the two together. Now in my case, for this particular frame, the whole thing is going to be black. So I'm just going to go ahead and get these glued up, and I won't paint it until I've actually cut the frame out and put it together. But be mindful that if you want these to be different colors, I would do that first before you do your glue up with the board next to it like that. Now for the next step, you'll want to glue the backboard and the sideboard together. So what I did was I ran a bead of glue down here, just flip that down, flip this up next to it, make sure your ends are lined up pretty closely, and then start clamping it off. I use quite a few clamps because this is an 8-foot board. So clamp that off to make sure it's tight, let it dry 4 to 6 hours, and you can start thinking about going back to work on it. It's really best if you let it dry overnight. So we used 17 clamps on our two 8-foot boards here, and now they're set and ready to dry. It reminds me of that old woodworker's joke, how many clamps do you need? One more than you own. I'm going to take a stab at trying to explain to you how I figure out what the dimensions of the frame are. Now I have a painting that is 30 inches by 24 inches. But it's going to sit 1/4 of an inch inside of the side part of the frame. So this is about 1/4 of an inch. And it's going to sit 1/4 of an inch from the top and the bottom of the frame. So I'm going to cut a 45-degree angle this way. The 45-degree angle is going to be longer than just the 1/4 of an inch up and down this way. If it's only a 1/4 of an inch, it's only a 1/16 of an inch difference. So I'm not going to get too excited about that. This is 3/8, so it's wider than a 1/4 of an inch, and I actually pick up closer to an 1/8 inch. So that would make this diagonal cut 4/8 inches or a 1/2 inch. So when I figure out the length, I have to say, well, I want 30, plus I want my 1/4 of an inch gap here between the canvas and the side. And then to get to the end out here, I need another 1/2 inch. So that becomes 3/4 of an inch. 3/4 of an inch. Now, because I have to do that on both sides, that means the length of the outside of my frame then becomes 31.5 inches. Because I've got 30 inches and 3/4 of an inch on both sides that I have to add in, it becomes 31.5 inches. My sides, which are 24, will be the same way. I've got 24 inches plus the 1.5 inches, because I've got 3/4 of an inch on each end. So this will become 25.5 inches. And that should leave me the perfect gap that I need in here for that 1/4 inch space, and everything will be cut nicely at a 45. We'll see how that works out. All right, we have our frame material all glued up. Now we can start cutting these down to size. Here's a good trick for you. The last frame that I made was 36 by 24. So on the outside, it needed to be 25.5 and 37.5. So I cut a couple of strips here just to make sure that I will always do it exactly the same way when I cut it. So I had an extra set here, so I've got a 25.5, which is what I need. And then this one, I'm going to cut down to 31.5, because remember ours is now 24 by 30, so we need 25.5 by 31.5. And I'll show you how we use these a little bit later. Now we're ready to start cutting our angles on the corners. So what I do is, I had that 8-foot board that I glued the sides to the bottom. And what I did was, now I cut this down closer to the size that I'm going to need. So for my top and the bottom, I need 25.5 inches. So I just cut this down to 27 inches, which should give me an adequate amount of spare here to cut my angles and get it the size that I want. So we've set our saw to a 45-degree angle. Make sure you pay attention to how you're cutting your angle into your frame, because you want to cut it correctly the first time. We'll cut that first cut. So we have our first 45-degree angle cut. And now we're going to want to cut this side here. And we want to make sure that the angle of that is cut in toward the middle, the same as this one. Let's use our measuring tool here that we made. And remember that this has to start at the long end. So you make sure that you are flush on this end with your measuring tool. And then you simply mark this side. Now, you're going to use this on both pieces, so you're going to make sure that that cut is the same. And the other thing it has done is now shown you how you have to hold your piece of wood in order to cut that 45-degree angle appropriately. So in this case, it has to be like this. So now you're going to come down, make sure that you're just barely taking that line off. And there's our second cut. So if we hold our tool up there, yep, we are nice and flush against the edges here, so that's the size that we want. Now we're going to repeat that process with the second piece that we need. So if this were the top piece, for example, we are now going to cut the bottom piece. So when you're done, just line your boards up side to side or back to back, whatever, and just make sure that your ends here, when you hold them together, are both perfectly flush. Okay, you want these two pieces to be as identical as possible. At the end of the day, this will be the top and the bottom of your frame. And now I'm going to cut the sides, and I'll use the same technique. Once you have all your pieces cut, you're going to want to fit them together to make sure that your corners all look pretty good, that your miters are fairly tight. What I have found is there's this little tool like this. If you're making larger frames and you put the band around your project and then you tighten it up, and that'll bring everything into square. So you'll get a very quick look at, is your project square? Is it going to fit the way it's supposed to? And this looks pretty good. We're pretty happy with that. So ultimately, of course, the frame will be painted black. But as you can see, this will fit in there very nicely. And it'll look like it's just floating in that frame. So the next step here, now that we know that this fits nice and square, is to loosen this all up, glue all the corners, tighten it back down, making sure that it's square, and then just leave it to dry. We'll come back and paint this later. Well, here's our finished project with the painting mounted in the floating frame. I really like the way this came out. I think her idea to make this black really paid dividends with this particular painting, because it's got the black in there, and it not only helps that black to pop out, but also makes the purples and the greens and the oranges look much more vibrant. So this is a great color frame for this particular painting. I hope this project was helpful to you. If it was, don't forget, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.